Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello, and thanks so much for joining us here for episode 390 with Ed Muzio. Ed is showing a better way to be flexible and adaptive with your teams and adjusting as things unfold by iterating wisely. So you'll learn 1, how many organizations are planning poorly, 2, approaches for greater clarity, and 3, how to make wiser group decisions. So if you'd like to take a look at the show notes or the transcript or the links to items we've referenced, it's over at awesomeatyourjob.com/F390. And while you're at awesomeatyourjob.com, I hope you check out some of our cool stuff. One of the newest cool things is some extra features on a little drop-down indicator on the podcast section of the navigation bar. So if you go to awesomeatyourjob.com, you'll see, hey, podcast and the other stuff. Well, there's a little drop-down carrot, if you will, which if you click will reveal some really cool goodies, such as every episode tagged by the topic and competency covered, an index of every gold nugget if you're a gold nugget subscriber, so you can find those all the faster, as well as some of the favorite episodes based on the data associated with downloads and engagement. So some cool extra stuff over at awesomeatyourjob.com. And now here's the story on Ed. Ed Muzio is CEO of Group Harmonics and an award-winning 3-time author. An expert in the scientific study of measuring and modifying human behavior, he's a sought-after consultant to business and industry worldwide and a popular media source. His new book is Iterate, Run a Fast, Flexible, Focused Management Team, an Inc. original in 2018, and he can be found at iteratenow.com. Big thanks to Ed for sharing his wisdom with us. Big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Harvard Business Review. This brilliant magazine, published at hbr.org, is the leading destination for smart management thinking. Fun fact, HBR has been mentioned in 108 episodes of the show. That's because HBR has great stuff that comes up often. They've got explainer videos, podcasts, real-world case studies, and much more. I think of HBR each night that I put on my special orange glasses. Their article, Will Blue Light Glasses Improve Your Sleep?, revealed that those who wore them reported better sleep and a 7% improvement in work performance as compared to those who wore the sham glasses. So I cite HBR anytime anyone tells me that I look silly wearing them. Now, much of HBR's content is available for free when you sign up at their site. Subscriptions that get you unlimited content cost $10 a month. If you visit hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME, you can save 10% off of that subscription. Again, to save 10% off of your HBR subscription, go to www.hbr.org/subscriptions and enter the promo code AWESOME. And big thanks to our sponsor, Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns recommends an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, then automatically invests your money for you. NerdWallet.com, whom I love on these sorts of matters, gives Acorns a whopping 4.7 stars and says, quote, if you want to make the most of your spare change, there's no better place to do that than Acorns. Head to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And we got a legal disclaimer here. It may not be representative of all clients. Tier 1 compensation provided. Compensation provides an incentive to positively promote Acorns. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. Please consider your objectives, risk tolerance, and Acorns' fees before investing. Acorns Advisors LLC, Acorns, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Brokerage services are provided to clients of Acorns by Acorns Securities LLC, member FINRA/SIPC. For more information, visit acorns.com. Ed, thanks so much for joining us here on the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
Hi, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, it's good to have you. And I'm excited to chat about your good stuff. But first, tell us a little bit about you learning the piano at the same time your kindergartner is learning the piano.
So my kindergartner had a talent for music. So we got a piano and got him in lessons. And I've always wanted to learn to play the piano. So I asked the instructor, in the one-on-one lesson, can I take lessons as well? Thinking he would say, you're kind of too old for this. And he said, no, adults can learn. It's a little different. So we go every week and he does his lesson for 30 minutes and I do my lesson for 15. And what I can tell you is I'm ahead of him now, Pete, and I'll be ahead of him, I'm guessing another 6 months to a year because I can take on more complex concepts. But he's going to get ahead of me and never look back because he has no problem with repetitious activity, right? He'll keep learning. He has no problem making mistakes and trying because that's just how kids learn, right? They fall down, get up again. And he has sort of infinite patience in the sense of he does get frustrated, but it's sort of like his whole life is about kind of bumping your head and going on. And so he has no hangups at all. Plus his brain is so flexible, right? So I'm watching him get better and better. And I'm going, I have 6 months, maybe a year, and then he's going to just be amazing. And I'm going to be still pecking away at one note at a time kind of thing. And that's going to be it after that.
Well, I have a feeling he's going to love that moment. I can remember when I beat my dad in chess and I knew he didn't let me win. And it was powerful in the sense that it's like, whoa, I am capable of learning and growing to a point in which I have never been able to attain before. And I read a lot of books about chess from the library along the way. And it's like, wow, there's something to this learning, this discipline, this sticking with things that yields cool results. That
sort of try, fail, try, check, try, fail, try again loop is human powerfulness in learning action. And he's doing it. I think you're right. I think when the day comes, he'll be pretty happy, and I'll be pretty happy too, honestly.
Cool. Well, you talk about try, fail. That's about as good a segue as we could ever get. You've got a book. It's called Iterate. What is the story behind it?
Well, Iterate is I mean, it's that same idea, right? Iterate is take a step, learn everything you can from that step, assuming the step was in the best direction you could figure out, but now check again and see, based on what you've learned, what your next step should be. So it's a general concept. Iteration is used by software programs that produce models for aircraft flight or weather. Iteration is used by plants as they grow, right? It's incremental adjustment, and it's a learning loop, kind of like learning the piano, which is, take what you've learned and incorporate it into the next step. And my book, Iterate, is about what we know that management teams in really strong organizations do in that space to make sure the whole organization is iterating.
Excellent. Well, so that sounds like a prudent, wise thing to do in terms of as you're trying to accomplish things and make them happen. What's sort of the alternatives that folks tend to try with less effectiveness?
Well, I like to talk about the sort of the story of, and I think you've seen this in the book, but the story of walking to your car, right? So you walk out the door of the office or the mall, and you've got 3 minutes to get to your car. And so you start walking, and what I just said happens, right? Every step is the best step you can take from there. But what's important about that is as you're going along, you've got your feet, which is the workforce, and they're detecting changes in the surface, or they're detecting, it's wet or something, and they're able to adjust without calling the CEO, which is your brain, right? Your brain set the pace and direction, get to the car in 3 minutes, but your CEO is not involved too much in the work of your feet. Your feet use a resource, that's blood oxygen. They can make a call to middle management, which is cardiovascular, get some more. If they need a whole lot more, that gets escalated even further. And then you do get the message in your CEO office, right? Which is breathe harder or walk slower. And then at the same time, you're looking out over the horizon, right? So you're trying to say, is that my car that I'm walking to? Is there an obstruction in my way? And you're feeding information down. So you've got this sort of metaphorical organization where information is flowing both up and down, and it's meeting at the right places, and decisions are getting made at all levels, just so that every step you take is the next best one from there. So when you notice, for example, that you're headed toward the wrong car, that's the moment you change direction, not 2 steps sooner and not 5 steps after. That's the model. The alternative, and what we see in a lot of organizations, unfortunately, is this sort of make a plan and then manage people as if sticking to the plan is the goal, right? And so you make a plan, you start walking on the line, and then you have this scenario where the people are sort of metaphorically saying, we're not heading toward the car anymore, and yet the institution can't seem to turn, right? That's management by one strict plan at the beginning of the year. It is the alternative. However, it does not produce nearly the observable levels of growth or agility or market dynamic receptiveness or any of those kind of things that an organization which can actually turn in small ways and big ways when new information comes up.
Well, so you mentioned a few potential indicators of performance or results. Could you share maybe any studies or research you've done that show what kind of a difference it makes when you iterate versus stick doggedly to the original plan?
There's all kinds of anecdotal stories out there. It's the work, what this book is based on is it's based on actually about 70 years of research and experience. So the research actually goes back to something called the Institute for Social Research, which was post-World War II, literally following managers around and writing down what they were doing and looking to see, does management actually make a difference? Does it matter how you manage? And then it tracks all the way up to, we have information coming to us today about self-organizing systems like ant colonies out of the neuroscience field, which say, ants kind of can find their way back and forth in these long lines because they leave a trail and they leave indicators of where they were and where to go next. That's called stigmergy, I believe. Don't quote me on that. So we've got this sort of long line of research that all kind of comes together and says, natural systems, computer systems, we know this is an effective way to solve problems. It's intuitively obvious. And, you can go find the big bears in any space. Like you go look at sort of Intel, for example. I used to work there during their growth years. the famous sort of anecdotal story about Intel is in their early years, they were competing with Motorola, and someone from Motorola, this is folklore really, but someone from Motorola said, I can't get an airplane ticket approved in the time it takes you to adjust your entire approach to our market, right? So because they could just take this whole big company and just shift it. That's what we see in these iterative companies is once we get these managers doing these simple 5 practices and doing them consistently, we start to see this agility emerge where, we can stay the course for as long as we need to, but as soon as we need to turn, we can turn.
And what are the 5 practices?
Well, the first one is called output and status broadcasting. Now, I should say before I start, these are my words. And one of the challenges in this work is language, because if I say something that sounds like something you've heard of before, you'll sort of assume I'm talking about that. And that becomes problematic because really what we're trying to do is describe behaviors. So as I talk through these, Pete, you have to sort of think about, the behavior I'm talking about as opposed to the terminology.
Mm-hmm.
But just broadly speaking, there are 5 of them. The first, output and status broadcasting, is managers are clear and repeated with their teams and everyone else about what they're trying to produce with the resources they have under their control. And secondly, they produce dashboards and plots and a particular kind of forward-looking data that shows 2 levels of the future so that they can sort of show graphically, here's where I thought I was trying to go. Here's what I now think is going to happen. Here's the difference between those 2 things so that conversations can be held about the difference. So that's number 1. Number 2 is what I call work preview meetings. That's those conversations. That's management teams getting together saying, where do we see this future variance? Where do we see a difference between the goal we're trying to achieve and the likely outcome of the path we're on? And what might we do with our resources to compensate for that? One of the great sort of tragedies, I think, of North American management in general is that so much time is spent in meetings looking backwards. Here's what was done. Here's a graph of everything I made up until this week. Here's a list of all things you got done last year. Some of that is fine, but all you can do as a manager is move resources around at this moment to affect what happens in the future. So if you're not mostly spending your meeting time talking about that, how do we change the resources around or not based on what we now understand about the future that we didn't understand before, you're having a problem. So that's work preview meetings. That also gets into the third one, which is called group decision making. And that's just the issue of once you're in one of those meetings and you detect a variance, it becomes complicated what you should do about it. And there's some particular information about how to make good group decisions. Things like, for example, voting is not a rational way to make decisions because people get focused on obtaining support rather than good information. So it's all around sort of coming to a good decision. That leads into the fourth one, which is called linked teams. And this is, we could talk quite a bit about this one, but the idea is that it's not an org chart. We don't have a set of individuals, each with their own goals. We have a set of teams run by managers, and each management team has a set of goals and works as a team so that everyone's looking up at their manager's goals instead of fighting with their peers on their own goals. And that way those teams link together and do the work of the organization. All of that is necessary. And the last thing is the fifth practice, and that is what we call frontline self-sufficiency. That's the idea that an individual contributor, someone on the front line, has what they need to do their job and to do it efficiently and is so empowered to do it. And I hate to use the word empowered. It's more specific than that. But the net effect is they have what they need. Nothing's in their way. And they're so enabled, I guess I should say, to do that work that they can actually forecast their output. So we don't have frontline supervisors telling the staff how it's going. We have the frontline staff telling the supervisor, I'm on track, I'm ahead, I'm behind. And that's what leads to those forecasts that I was talking about, because that's how management ultimately knows what's going on. So that set of 5 things really keeps the organization always taking a step, looking forward, saying, here's what we thought was going to happen. Here's what we now think is going to happen. What adjustments should we make? Here's our decision to make them. Let's do that and move on. And then just iterating that cycle over and over again as they chomp away at their goals.
Well, so let's dig into a little bit of this now. When you mentioned having the dashboards and you have 2 levels to the future. What do you mean by that?
Well, dashboards, by the way, is one of those dangerous terms because everyone has one and they already think they know what it means. So I do use the word, but I always kind of worry about that. So here's the concept. Let's take a really simple example. Now, this can work for complex things too, but in a simple example, I'm producing something in the line that I run, and I'm supposed to make 100 a week. So in a typical sort of North American management situation, I would come to you, Pete, if you're my boss, and I'd have a graph, and it would show week by week how many I made up to today. Maybe if it was a good graph, it would also have some kind of a plan or a forecast line that would show, hey, I'm supposed to stay flat. That's the plan. Or I'm supposed to do, 10% more every week until I ramp to this level. And so that's the future. That's pretty standard in management. The problem with that is, of course, what you're going to ask me is, Ed, are you going to hit that forecast? And then there's going to be a long narrative discussion in which I sort of opine about that, right? and then you try and sort of figure out if I'm trying to hide anything, right? It becomes this very ceremonial dance. What we need instead is I need to have a second future on that graph. So I need to have, what's done in the past, that's fine. I've got my plan line. This is what I'm supposed to deliver. And then I've got a second line that says, based on my best intelligence today, here's what I think is going to happen. Now, that second line might be right on top of the plan line, in which case there's nothing to talk about. Or maybe it varies. Maybe I'm saying, look, I'm not going to get as many as I thought, or hey, I'm going to overrun. If that variance is big enough, that becomes something that you, me, and my peers in your management team need to talk about, because someone else may need to adjust some resources, or I may need to adjust some resources to deal with that fact, whether it's good or bad, right? Even if I'm ahead of the game, it's still potentially an issue for somebody who's going to get overwhelmed by my output, right? So difference is difference, and difference needs attention.
You said that there's the plan, and then there is the projection is your best guess as to how things are going to unfold here. And I guess what gets interesting there is that you mentioned the dance. There's all these layers associated with, expectation and authority and punishment, shoot the messenger activities or not. And it's almost like you have to have a somewhat, mature and respectful culture to even deal with the fact that a variance exists. They might just be like, Ed, do the thing we agreed that you would do.
Right. No, it's funny, it is, and that is, the North American management, I always call it the North American management model, right? We have this sort of mythology, and it's beautiful mythology. It says, Pete, you're my boss. You say to me, Ed, look, these are your goals. Go and get them. I don't want to hear it, right? Just go and get your goals. So don't bring me forecasts that are different, right? Just get your work done, right? So that's the mythology. And by that mythology, you tell my peers the same thing. And then we all bring you our goals, and you knit it together into what your boss wants. The problem with that is that I am going to have variance, and my peers are going to have variance. And at some point, I'm going to come to you and say, I can't do this unless you give me some of Fred's money. And Fred's going to come and say, don't do that. I need more Ed's money, right? And you're going to become, and you know this if you've worked in any kind of management space, right? You become the referee. You're almost like a parent in a dysfunctional household where everyone is bringing you their problems. Everything is framed as mission critical, and it's your job to sort it out. Meanwhile, your boss is looking at you saying, is it going to happen? So your boss is looking down at you. You're looking down at me and my peers, and everyone's trying to sort out kind of, are these people lying to me? Are they telling the truth? So it's a very non-trusting culture, but it's also a very preoccupied culture with trying to sort out information. So what I'm saying is, you're right, it is a cultural shift. And we sometimes start it by saying, look, no news is bad news because we don't know what's going on. Bad news is good news because we want to see variance early. And good news is no news because if there's no variance, we don't need to talk about it, right? So what that looks like sort of mechanically is on that graph that I have, I'm going to carry my past production and my past forecasts. And so part of what you're sort of looking for from me and expecting from me is that my forecasts are pretty good. So I'm not allowed to change my past forecast to match my past production. So over time, you'll see, hey, Ed's pretty good at forecasting his work. When he says this is going to go off the rails, I have reason to believe him. The team has reason to believe him. We probably should adjust to that. Otherwise, it just becomes, like you said, sort of a fingers in the ears. Don't bring me bad news and don't tell me that, just go fix it kind of thing. But that doesn't really work.
Yeah, I'm right with you there. And so on the second practice, the work preview meetings, could you give us some perspective or tools on what are some great ways to provide previews?
Well, so one of them is that graph. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, hey, Pete, I've got this problem. I've got some variance. I need to talk about it. So once you've got a team that's presenting that to you and recommending to you what goes on the agenda, that sets you up to say, okay, of all these different variances, I'm going to put this, this, and this on the agenda. So one of the practices is, as the manager of managers, have people tell you, 24, 12, whatever hours in advance, here's my biggest variance that I want to talk about. And then you be in charge of building the agenda and saying, okay, from my perspective, these are the most important ones. Once you're in the conversation, we have something called the OSIR, OSIR, it's an acronym, the OSIR report. And that just stands for objective, status, issue, and recommendation. So you manage me to make that kind of report. So you say, Ed, you're going to make your report now. Tell us about the variance. I'm there with you, my boss, and my peers. And I'm going to say, my objective is X, Y, and Z, as you know, because you've heard this from me before, because of my output and status broadcasting. My status is, Here it is on my graph. You can see the variance. You've seen my graph before. You know how to read it. So that takes a minute. My issue is the root cause of my variance. Whatever that is, I'm short on people, or, things are happening differently than I thought. And R is my recommendation. I recommend to the team that XYZ happen, that Fred give me some of his resources, that you relax my deadline, that I do this or that thing, right? So what that does is in about 3 minutes, it tees up the conversation. It's not 10 or 15 minutes of me talking about reasons and root causes. It's me talking for a very short period of time, putting a recommendation on the table, a straw man, and then saying, okay, now, here's what I think we should do. What are we going to do? You're the boss, Pete, but we as a team are going to decide together, what are we going to do?
Mm-hmm. That is helpful, certainly. And especially because if your variance is bad, it's probably a very natural temptation to make excuses and to share numerous reasons, external factors that can contribute to it, just so that the folks you're reporting to don't think that you are underperforming because you're maybe sensitive about it. You're not delivering on what you hope to be delivering. But when you sort of summarize it in terms of this is the expectation is that we go in this format, it's going to take 3 minutes. I think that could really go a long way in reducing the length of long meetings.
Well, it does. One other piece that's important is we always say discussions of status and discussions of history are minimized, not eliminated, but minimized. So we do in that same meeting, the first thing that'll happen for the first, let's say, 5 minutes is me and all my peers will just put up all our graphs all at once. That's that dashboard concept. And say, here's what I'm doing. This, and this are going well. This one we're going to talk about in a few minutes, right? My next peer goes and says, we're all on track here. Next peer goes and says, these three are a little behind. We talked about that last week, right? So there's this very brief kind of quick status update that takes maybe 10 minutes out of the hour, if that. What that does, to your point, is it starts to let people see, so my peers and you to some extent, start to see, hey, Ed's house isn't on fire. He's not just a collection of problems. He's running this whole thing. It's mostly going okay. Now he's asking for help in this area. It's a way of building trust. Because you're right. If all we ever did was bring in our problems, then what happens is pretty soon my peers see me as nothing but a collection of problems. And then we lose trust. So that little brief status at the front end, which educates us about each other's graphs, also educates us as to the fact that we're trustworthy. Then from there, we can go into that brief format and have a conversation. That's right.
Cool. Well, so then let's hit the group decision-making piece there. You mentioned voting is not the greatest of means to arrive at decisions. What are some key ways that we arrive at optimal decisions?
Yeah, so that's I always feel like I should preface this by saying this is not political commentary. This is business, small group decision making. But voting produces a rational result. Now, some people have said, well, we think that's true in politics as well. That's to the listener to decide. But what we know is if we put a group of people together and say, we're going to vote on the best answer, then the focus turns to garnering support, right? So I'm not going to worry too much about information. I'm going to say, hey, peer number one, if you go with me on this one, I'll go with you next time. I'll owe you a favor, kind of a thing. That may be good for me and peer number one, but that's not so good for the organization, right? So we can't do voting. Consensus, which is we don't do anything until we all agree, has been shown to produce good quality decisions. The problem is the time. By the time we get everyone to agree, we're too late for the business cycle. So we go into what's called a consultative mode. Now, traditional consultative decision-making is Pete's the decider. We're all not the decider. We each talk to you one-on-one, and then you make a decision. That's okay. But what we know is in these complex scenarios where everything's interdependent, I actually need to hear my peers talking to you, and you need me to hear my peers talking to you because they're going to raise an issue that I have information about. And so we do what we call group consultative, which is each of us has a job to teach you what we know. And that's important. You basically say to us, my agreement at this moment is off the table. Here's how I'm leaning or not. But my agreement is off the table. Teach me what you know. And then I say to you, Pete, if we don't do this, X, Y, and Z are going to happen. And you say to me, Ed, I think what you're telling me is, from your perspective, if we don't do this, this, and this, then X, Y, and Z are going to happen. Do I understand that? And I say, yes, that's it. And then that part of the conversation is done, right? So it relieves me of the stress of feeling like I have to convince you to go my way. It also puts the focus on information transfer. So you learn as much as you can from all the team members. In the process, they're learning from each other. And then as the decider, we already know before we start, it's going to fall to you to make the decision. And the decision you make is not necessarily the most popular decision. Might or might not be. It's not a vote. It's not a who spoke the loudest or who spoke the most. It's you saying, hey, I'm the person in this seat and I've got the role of decider. And based on what you all are teaching me right now, here's my decision. And here's another tip your listeners can use. Your decision isn't done until the team can say it back to you, both what was decided and your rationale for it. So not only Pete decided to give X number of dollars from Fred to Ed, but because he and we believe that Ed's work in this area is higher priority or more immediate or whatever, right? That's important because we're talking about managers. The managers have to be able to take that decision back to their teams and say, here's what we as a management team decided, and here's why. And so I call that commissioning. The decider makes sure to take the time that everyone understands both the decision and the rationale before we consider the decision to be complete.
Okay. Now, when you started that conversation, hey, teach me what you know, you said, I'm putting agreement to the side. What do you mean by that?
Well, oftentimes, I mean, I'm sure you've had these experiences, and many of us have. We may know that you're going to make the decision, right, Pete? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say to you, Pete, you got to go my way, and here's why. And you're going to start to detect some emotional content in there, and I'm going to be animated, and I'm going to maybe not even stop talking because I feel like you haven't come around yet. But once you say to me, look, we're not at the part of the process where I'm going to agree with you or not. We're just at the part of the process where my job is to understand you. Let me say back to you, Ed, what I think you just told me. Do I have it right? And if I say, yes, you have it right, then you say to me, well, do you have anything else to add, other information I need? And I go, yes, here's some more. And we do that until I finally say, that's all the information I have. So it's a way of getting the information out of me while sort of relieving me of both the pressure and stress and also the reality of trying to convince you. Because then you can literally turn to me and say, Ed, thank you. Thank you for the information. I'm going to consider that. I can appreciate that you're, not only is this difficult for you logistically, but it's going to be really kind of an emotional thing for you. I've learned that as well, but I need to move on now and hear what the others have to say. And it opens up the airtime because everyone has something to contribute in terms of facts and information. Nobody feels that need to sort of filibuster, right, until you come around.
Yeah, understood. So that is helpful when you segment or separate those dimensions from each other. Well, now I'm curious, when it comes to frontline self-sufficiency, what tend to be the bottlenecks, the obstacles that mean we don't have the frontline self-sufficiency, that kind of the recurring things that folks need but don't have, so they can't do what they need to do?
On one level, the frontline self-sufficiency is one of the easiest, maybe the easiest of the key practices to understand because the components all kind of tie together very simply. It's really three things that lead to a fourth. Your frontline employees need to have clear output goals, just to say they know what they're supposed to do and they can count it, they know what it is. That one's pretty easy to understand. Self-managed feedback, which means they are tracking their own work more frequently than management is tracking it. So it's not a question of management telling them what's going on. It's a question of them already knowing how they're doing. And then the third thing is what I call control of resources. And that just means they have what they need to do the job, right? So if there's material or something they need, they can get to it. Again, that's not always easy to do, not too hard to think about. But the formula is goals plus feedback plus resources equals forecasts. And what happens is once you have a workforce that's equipped that way, they know what they're supposed to do. They know if they're doing it and how well they're doing it and how fast they're doing it. And they have everything they need at their disposal to do it. Then they start to be able to make those forecasts. They start to be able to say, when the boss asks on Tuesday or Wednesday, what are we looking like for Friday? They can say, I'm on track. This is typical. I'm a little behind, but it's recoverable. I'm way behind. And that's the information that gets rolled up into that second forecast, right? That second future line where I say, hey, boss, hey, Pete, here's what I know is going to happen in the next, 2 to 6 weeks. I'm getting that from the front line because they're the ones that actually know where we are. So without the frontline self-sufficiency, forecasting becomes sort of academic and hypothetical, and the process does not work nearly as well.
Understood. Well, and so I'm also wondering, when people don't have those things, either the goal is unclear or the feedback is incomplete or the resources are also incomplete, what are the things you see time and time again are among the most common things that are incomplete and missing from the self-sufficiency picture?
It's in terms of specifics, it varies, but I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the ones that's often missing, not surprisingly, is clear goals, right? So we have someone who, they know their job is to, let's say, get these orders filled. That's a goal, but there's not really a how fast or turn time or anything like that. And so if you sort of ask them how it's going, they go, it's okay, And if you say, are you on track, ahead, or behind? They sort of almost can't answer you because it's not a clear enough goal, right? So that's one failure mode. Another one is maybe the goal is clear, but the resource control is an issue. So it's like, you have to get these orders filled or whatever, but there's a step in your process where you have to get approval for, I don't know, a shipment, let's say. And sometimes that approval takes 2 hours and sometimes it takes 3 days. And so then when I ask you for a forecast, my frontline for a forecast, they'll say, well, I'm okay, but I don't know what's going to happen because I have to turn this thing in. So it'll either be Wednesday or Friday, right? And so that's an issue of control of resources. So it's a different thing, but it's also in the way of that forecast. It's a good way to kind of look backwards and say, if you can't get a fair forecast, a reasonable forecast, you can look back and say, okay, why can't they do it? Is it because they don't know what the goal is? Is it because they don't know how they're doing at it? Or is it because there are these things that are out of their control in the way? It's always one of those three.
Right. Yeah, that's a helpful framework in terms of segmenting that into discrete pieces. And I guess I'm thinking about, sometimes we have no idea because it's like, we've never done this before. It's new stuff and so I guess that sort of like feedback is missing, and maybe not so much from management, but just from almost like the work itself. It's like we're entering new uncharted territory, and I don't know how long it's going to take for me to learn how to do this thing or to build this thing that we've never built before.
Yeah, that's a reality. And that can actually happen just like that. But one of the things we also know is there's a whole major category of work out there that we call troubleshooting work, which is, the phone rings. You think of a call center for, computer repair or something, right? The phone rings and the problem is put in front of me. And if I'm the frontline worker, I don't know what the work is until I get the problem. And so in that kind of scenario, although it's true that I could say, well, I don't exactly know how long the next one's going to take because I don't know what it is, there are still tools we can use around those goals and feedback and resources to make forecasting possible. So one of the tools we use is batch queues, right? So I can say, I have this many issues which are received and undiagnosed, meaning it's in my queue to figure out the problem. I have this many issues which are diagnosed but unsolved, meaning I know what the problem is, but I'm not done implementing it yet. And then I have this many that are solved. Sometimes, people will further segment those into something like category A, category B, whatever. These take longer than those. But when you start to see individual contributors who work on that kind of work use those kind of systems, what starts to happen is they can, again, start to make forecasts. So you'll say midweek, how are you doing? Now, they can't tell you what the next thing on the phone is going to be, but they can say, normally at this time of the week, I have 15 things that are received and undiagnosed. And right now I have 42. So I am behind, right? Or normally I have this many of type B solutions to implement, and I only have 10% as many right now, so I'm ahead. Even though we're all doing things to some extent we've never done before, you can start to work around that a bit and still get some intelligence into the system about, within some broad bounds, what does this week look like relative to your other weeks of doing things no one's ever done before? We still need that information.
And when it comes to forecast, you mentioned it being fair, and you use the term a fair day's work forecast. What precisely does that mean, and how would you contrast that with the alternative?
Well, that idea of a fair day's work forecast is, once I have those three things, if I'm a frontline worker, I've got those goals, self-managed feedback, and control resources, then I can know what I can accomplish reasonably, right? I think traditional managers will be afraid of this, say, well, how do I know they're not going to sandbag, or how do I know they're not going to lie? But what we know about humans is they tend to try and perform pretty well, most of them. And so once I sort of know what I can get done in a fair day's work, I can start to make a forecast and say, again, I'm ahead, I'm on track, I'm behind. That's contrasted with, in the North American management model, the boss tells me how much to do, and then I either do it or I don't. So what happens? Well, for one thing, I can only do so much, and my capacity doesn't change by my boss's opinion. However, my presentation of what I'm doing will change, right? So you're going to tell me, get this much done or not. And if I can't reasonably do it, and I want to survive, which I do because I have that reptile part of my brain that's geared towards survival, then I'm going to paint a picture or tell a story or find a reason why that wasn't possible. And I'm going to sort of make it okay, right? And if the boss is really setting unreasonable goals, nobody can do it. Then whoever has the most reasonable story gets to keep their job. And that's how it plays out. But now we've got some really bad information in the organization because we have these quote unquote expectations that, first of all, aren't realistic. And now we've got this layer of storytelling on top of it, which is here's how you get around that. And that'll get trained to the new people, right? And so this is where management ceases to be functional and starts becoming ceremonial, right? And now we're getting the work done despite management instead of thanks to the feedback and adjustment of management. That's what we're really trying to avoid.
Yeah. And I think it takes a pretty good level of understanding in terms of what's really on your plate and what you're really committed to in order to have those. I think there's a lot of people in work life experience almost sort of like a chaotic sea of just too much that and it's kind of just all a big old cesspool of requests and action items. And for many, it's a matter of what is latest and loudest, the most urgent and terrifying fire that they need to handle. And it's not a really fun way to live.
No, it's more than that. I'm going to use your cesspool quote, but it takes years off your life. Like, it's not even funny. It literally does, right? So And that goes back to that output and status broadcasting, which is one of the things we advise managers at all levels is you need to have 3 or 5 or 7 things which you can use. It's almost like an elevator pitch, right? To summarize the output you're delivering. And that output and that story and that summary needs to be presented over and over again to your next level, so that people understand what they're doing. Because we're all subject to overload, right? We're all subject to that cesspool of endless stuff. And if there's not a clear drumbeat from management saying, here's what we're measuring, here's what we're doing, here's what we're forecasting on, here's where we're going, then it's just easy to get lost.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ed, tell me anything else you want to make sure to mention before we shift gears and hear about some of your favorite things.
I think probably the last thing I would say is, as you think about this, as the listeners think about this, I've found that there's some confusion in that we need some more language around managing. So when you become a manager, you start reading and getting advice about how to manage people. I like to call that managing with a capital ing. And that is true for anybody who manages people, right? You have to set goals. You have to deal with compensation. You have to help them solve their issues. You have to help them develop. That's all tremendously important. There's another category of work that I call management with a capital ment. And that is being a member of the broader team of managers who together work in concert with each other, in coordination with each other, to coordinate and adapt the resources of the organization to achieve its goals. I believe that most of what's written for managers is written about managing with a capital ing. And my book, Iterate, is written about management with a capital ment. And I think it's complementary and equally important and often overlooked.
Thank you. Well, now could you share with us a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
Yeah, one that I really like is, it's from Pema Chodron, who's actually a Buddhist, but she says, we are all capable of becoming fundamentalists because we get addicted to other people's wrongness. And I like that kind of on a personal level, but I also like it on a group meetings level. We've all been in meetings where someone was a fundamentalist because they were addicted to everyone else's wrongness.
Thank you. How about a favorite study or experiment or a bit of research?
There was a study done years ago by a very famous guy named Ash it was about social conformity. And the idea was, 5 people around a table and you show all 5 people these different lines and 2 of them are the same length and you ask them which 2. And the first 4 people give the wrong answer, but they're in on it. The question was, will the 5th person speak out against the group or will they go along? And overwhelmingly, they went along. But the piece that I find myself quoting is, that's from the 60s. It's been redone a lot of times, but somewhere in the around 2005, 2006, somebody did it again with an MRI machine on the subject. And the question was, are they just sort of rolling over and they secretly know the answer, but they're not saying it? Or is their perception being changed? And, Ash himself always thought it was just a question of people, they just didn't have the courage or the stamina to speak up. What we found out was it actually changes your perception. So groupthink is more than we thought. It's not just about a lack of courage. Your perception changes. And that just, I think, highlights the importance of, if you see a difference, speak out in a group. Because even if you're wrong, just you speaking out might help the next person who actually sees the real thing to actually be able to see it. You're actually helping the perceptiveness of the group.
Oh, that's a nice implication to highlight. Thank you. Yeah. And how about a favorite book?
I'm just finishing up a book called The Insightful Leader by Carl Ferguson. And it's sort of the flip side of the coin to play to your strengths, which is how any one of those strengths, like results orientation or something, can become a hindrance. And I think she did a really good job of explaining it got you here, but also it can become a hindrance, and how to sort of keep your strength but not overdo it.
And a favorite tool?
Couple, Ladder of Inference by Chris Argyris. If you don't know that one, you can Google it. It talks about how we build our sort of our perceptions of what's going on around us. The other one is, if you don't know, Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I won't try and spell it, but just look for Flow. It's about sort of having these great experiences of enjoying ourselves, and it has to do with challenge and knowledge or ability being held in balance. Those have been useful to me personally, but also professionally.
And my hat's off for correctly pronouncing his name. I imagine you've practiced it before.
I did one of my whiteboard videos. I have a series of whiteboard videos, and I actually called his office and said, please just say his name to me enough times that I can get it, because I don't want to say it wrong. And now I've got good notes on it.
I've Googled it myself. Well done. And how about favorite habit?
It's sort of boring, but I live my life by my calendar. I've got my calendar on a separate monitor next to me at all times, and I schedule everything from meetings to things I have to do. And I think I would guess 80% less effective if I didn't live by my calendar. So I feel like that's a good one.
And is there a particular nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate with folks who are listening to you?
It's from my mentor, actually. The quote is, you can't bake a pie one slice at a time. His name is Bill Daniels. He taught me a lot of this stuff when I first got into the space, and it's about that idea of those linked teams, which are, you can't assign Ed to one thing and Fred to something else and Pete to something else, and then knit it all together later. If you're a team, you have to act like a team. You can't bake a pie one slice at a time.
And if folks want to learn more, get in touch, where would you point them?
A couple places, iteratenow.com. That's just ITERATE now.com. That's the site for the book. It's got my bio and my social media handles and things like that. My firm is Group Harmonics, again, groupharmonics.com. And that's where our offerings and classes and stuff are.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks seeking to be awesome at their jobs?
I think the thing I would say is we've been talking about without talking about culture, right? The culture around us. And I think people tend to feel powerless. On that walk to your car, it's like the culture is the weather. But the culture really isn't the weather. The culture has actually been clearly defined by people that have thought about it a lot as the collection of habits we took forward from the past, right? So the implication is what you're doing now is going to become the culture of tomorrow. So if you're walking to your car, it's not the weather, it's your habits. It's how you swing your arms, it's whether you smoke a cigarette, those kind of things. And so I think my challenge is, if you've got a world where it seems like management is more ceremonial than functional, don't just say, oh, that's the culture, nothing I can do, and throw your hands up. Instead say, oh, that's the culture. What can I do differently today that people will notice and repeat tomorrow so that I can change the culture?
Lovely. Well, Ed, this has been a lot of fun. I wish you tons of luck with your book, Iterate, and all you're up to.
Pete, thank you. Likewise, enjoyed the time and good luck with your show.
This time, my favorite takeaway happened when Ed and I were discussing the study. So he was looking at the lines of different lengths. And if you'll recall, that study is when you have some Confederates who all say they perceive a line to be one length when it is clearly not at all that length. And then the real person kind of goes along frequently. And so Ed brought up the new research, which said they had them in an MRI. In so doing, we got to see if they were just sort of being cowardly and suppressing what they actually thought, or if their perception was being changed. And their perception was changing. And thusly, the inspirational takeaway for me, it's huge, is if you speak up and maybe offer a different or contrary point of view, you are actually improving the perceptiveness of the whole team. I think that's so cool because it's often much easier to kind of shrink and go the party line and say what everybody else is saying. But if you do the opposite, not only are you introducing a new idea, which is fun and worthy and may well be the optimal idea, but you are improving the whole team's perceptiveness, which is pretty cool. So I dug that and more from Ed. Hope you did too. Again, the show notes, the transcript, the links to items we've referenced are on over at awesomeatyourjob.com/F390. If you haven't already, I hope you'll push subscribe. You'll hear from our next guest. It's Dr. Sean Jones, and he is talking about finding heart in art, ways to proactively beat out burnout. Hope you catch you there. And peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.
Calling all coffee drinkers. If you've been trying to enhance your daily coffee routine, then Quest has got your back with their brand new iced coffees. Now available in 2 delightfully delicious flavors that'll be sure to add an extra pep in your step. Vanilla latte and mocha latte. Quest has been on a mission to help fuel you with protein-forward foods you'll love. Each bottle of Quest iced coffee is packed with 200 milligrams of caffeine, the same amount as 2 cups of regular coffee, plus 10 grams of protein per serving to help you supercharge your day. And did I mention that they only contain 1 gram of sugar? It might just be time to cheat on your iced coffee with iced coffee. Find Quest iced coffees on Amazon.com/Quest Nutrition. That's Amazon.com/Quest Nutrition.